Hooray, hurrah! Welcome, everybody, once more to the Greg Proops Film Club here, located at East Hollywood's most enchanting cinematic confabulation, the Los Feliz 3 here at the American Cinematheque. Excuse me, tonight we're showing the awesome 1954 British film comedy classic starring Alastair Sim, The Bells of St. Trinian's. This is where you applaud. Hooray! We're very excited to show this picture tonight. Jennifer, my wife, is the curator of the Greg Proops Film Club, and we decided to show a picture this month to sort of whisk us away from all that's happening in the world, and we're not going to talk about it all. Like the movie Cabaret, so life is disappointing, forget it. Here, life is beautiful. Even the orchestra is beautiful. So tonight's movie is one that I think that you'd be hard-pressed to even find today because it is so outlandish. The director, Frank Launder, wrote the screenplay for a Hitchcock picture called The Lady Vanishes, which is one of my favorite, and probably Jennifer's favorite, Hitchcock movie, and it's a superb movie. And then he had a long career in British film. He made a picture about 4 years before this with Margaret Rutherford, who you may know as Miss Marple in the Miss Marple movies, of which there are 4. I had always thought there was like 8 or 10 because my memory as a child was that they were on every Sunday. And of course there's been a lot of Miss Marple subsequent to that, including one that we watched recently with Angela Lansbury from the 80s. What was it, Murder Under the Sun or something, which was excruciatingly awful. And I don't know about you guys, but has anyone been lately just watching the trashiest shit in the world to take their mind off everything? We watched, I believe, Death on the Nile. Yeah, someone went, oh, wow. Greg, how bad is it getting at your house? All the Peter Ustinov Hercule Poirot movies, which are basically like having lunch with a room full of British actors. Not a lot happens. There's a murder at some point, and some of the actors are fabulous. Maggie Smith is in one, Diana Rigg is in one, and she looks fantastic, and clearly she's phoning the role in from a place far, far away. Peter Ustinov is doing his usual thing where he is just wildly in character, and they're wildly diverting, but this Margaret Rutherford and Alastair Sim were in a picture together, which was a girls' school movie, and this movie takes place in a girls' school. In fact, it takes place in St. Trinian's. And then she was supposed to do this picture and play the head mistress in this movie, Margaret Rutherford, and Alastair Sim was supposed to play the sort of sleazy gambler dude that you'll see when the movie begins. And Margaret Rutherford couldn't do the picture, and Alastair Sim said, I'll do it. I'll play the headmistress in drag. And so you'll find when the movie begins, that Alastair Sim plays Miss Fritten, and there's no mention whatsoever that it's a man for the entirety of the movie, which makes it super awesome beyond all measure. Now, Alastair Sim is from Edinburgh, Scotland, and he played, I can't believe I said that. Talk about the shallowness of a performer. You know, when you're a comedian, and I know a lot of you are like, when's that happening? When you're a comic, people think, oh, it must be a very exciting life. It is, of course. I get to travel all over the world and to Texas. And in fact, I'm going to Texas next week. And every time I'm there, you know, I'm like, really? They're having a measles outbreak there now, which is part of their cultural program, and then there's a titty bar and a gun shop that you can get measles in, and then a religious weirdo conflagration place. We're also going to Waco, and every time I'm in Texas, they're always whining at me, you know, like, oh, Mexican, and I'm like, Texas? What would you eat? Because what is Texas without Mexican food? Oklahoma. So I travel around, but the thing about being a comedian is there's, of course, something deeply wrong with all comedians. And don't let anyone tell you different. There's a gaping, gigantic, black, illimitable starless void where our soul should be. And we seek to fill it with the approval of rooms full of strangers who laugh every 15 to 30 seconds at the things we think of. And so that's what it's like being a comic. And you think, oh, well, are you going to stop talking and are you going to be funny? It really doesn't matter to us. I would talk if there was no one in this room. That's how gigantic the void is inside. The shallow love of the many, as we used to say, is way more important than the sincere love of the few. And that all performers subscribe to that. Now, Alistair Sim, as I say, is from Edinburgh, and I was going to say he played in World War I. That's where I was going, where my shallowness kicked in. You actually don't play in a war, I believe, having not participated in one except for the war on intelligence that's been going on in this country my entire life. You participate in a war. Although, as one fantastic writer whose name escapes me, someone asked him about World War I, and they said, "What was World War I like?" And he went, "Oh, my dear boy, the noise and the people." He came back from the war and he informed his parents that he was going to be an actor, at which point they disowned him almost completely. And then he went to the stage. And Alistair Sim, you may remember, he's not a famous movie actor to American audiences, but he's in every Christmas, he's in the black and white version from the 50s of A Christmas Carol, which is called Scrooge, the American version. And he is my favorite Scrooge. If you've never seen his version, it is fantastic and absolutely worth watching because he brings humor to Scrooge and he brings humanity to Scrooge. Now, we've all watched all the different Christmas carols. There's the one with Guy Pearce from a few years ago, which is like absolutely beyond the frozen waste of nasty. And yeah, the pail is there, and then over there is where that movie is. And Guy Pearce, of course, perfect to play Scrooge. What? And then there's the Patrick Stewart one where you're like, what? Are we going into space? And then there's a George C. Scott Scrooge from the 80s, which is sort of like having Patton play Scrooge. He's quite angry that the Germans are winning the Christmas War. And then there's a Reginald Denny one from the 30s, but Alistair Sim's is really the funniest one. And his transition from being an evil, horrible, grasping, hideous, careless, nasty millionaire with no feelings who has no truck with the poor and no humanity in him whatsoever, and no ability to feel empathy or to reach out and worry about other people's situation, to only be selfish and want to be acquisitive and, oh, I thought we weren't going to talk about today. Anyway, his version, his transition to being the generous, kind Ebenezer Scrooge at the end is absolutely marvelous. Now, what I'm going to say about Edinburgh is there's a festival there every year called a Fringe Festival, and it's gigantic. And I started going there in 1952, yeah, exactly, right after the war. And we showed the Koreans a thing or two. And I was playing there for years, doing stand-up and the podcast and improv and every manner of performing at the Edinburgh Festival. And when I first started to go, it was basically an excuse for comedians to get together and gather around a bowl of cocaine and stay up all night and tell stories and whatnot and drink and then fight. And then it got more and more corporate. And now if you go to the Edinburgh Festival, there's things like food and restaurants and barbecue sandwiches and sushi and whatnot. When I first went there, there was hot dogs, cigarettes, and Coke dealers who spoke in an accent so thick that you couldn't understand them. I remember my hash dealer lived above the Pleasance, and his name was Jimmy, and I would ring him and go, Jimmy, do you have any hash? And he'd go, that's right, Greg, it's on show off night, it's a fucking mad, and he'd just come around about 3 o'clock and just have it and fucking do it then, okay? And I'd be like, perfect. So he's from there. And then, so after the show in Edinburgh in the old days, this is in the 90s, there was no taxis or anything like that, because Edinburgh taxi cab drivers are absolutely singular in the fact that if you get in an Edinburgh cab and it's pouring rain and you've got a bunch of groceries with you and you're like, I'd like to be taken over there to where I'm staying at my flat, they'll go, no, No, it's just a wee bit down the road. You can walk it. And you're like, but I'm paying you money. Did you say that? But it's just down there. It's only a couple hundred yards. And you're like, you have a job, right? Their job is to smoke in their cab and read the paper and not drive you anywhere. So then, of course, I'd get in the cab, and they can't understand anything I say because of my American accent. I'd be like, over there, over there. And they're like, then I can. And then I'd say, like, okay, I'm in the Proclaimers. And then they'd give me a ride for free. The delightful part about being in a cab in Edinburgh is if you're with an English person, they will absolutely ignore the English person until the end of fucking time and only speak to you and pretend to not understand what people from London are saying, which is, when Scotland wanted to devolve a few years ago and become their own separate country instead of, as they're called in brilliantly by Irving Welsh in Train Spotting, the pathetic pseudo-nation that they are, I would have loved if Scotland had become their own country, because they clearly would have set up a border and made every English person show their passport. Because as much as they dislike everyone else, they hate English people more than life itself. And every Scottish person has an American cousin. So we're sort of golden when we go there. But when you would walk home, it was impossible to get a cab at a certain point at night. And let's just say you were high and drunk, and you were coming back from your show, and you were still in your show clothes, and you were trying to flag a cab down, and there was nothing doing, and you had to walk all the way across Edinburgh, which is the spookiest place in the goddamn universe. By the way, it's where Jekyll and Hyde takes place, because Robert Louis Stevenson was from there, and it's based on an actual person from Edinburgh named Deacon Brodie, who by day was a deacon who led a church, and at night led a band of brigands around Edinburgh that assaulted people and robbed them and stuff at sword point and whatnot. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde takes place there. The Body Snatchers takes place in Edinburgh. The streets, they call them a close, are this big, and there's no fucking light whatsoever, and the ground is covered with sick and beer and spilt everything, and you'll hear a noise behind you and be like, and then you'll realize it's a group of teenagers. Because teenage girls roam the streets of Edinburgh late at night. And there is no force more frightening in the fucking universe than being set upon by a group of teenage girls in Edinburgh. Never mind the big dudes who hang out at the chip shop, at the chip shop, and want to kick your ass because they've just been to the Hibs Hearts game and the Hibs lost or whatever, and so now they have to punish everyone by having a big fracas at the chip shop. They're one matter. But teenage girls in Edinburgh are like an atomic force. In the shortest skirts in the world, no fucking clothing on, gigantic heels, tons of makeup, hair teased up, and it's freezing outside, and they're wearing no clothes. They're smoking, they're drinking lager from a tin, and they're pregnant. And they're all in a gang together. And if there's been times I've run by them and I've run across the street so that I wouldn't be assaulted by them, because if you get in the midst of them, they're going to kick your fucking ass. So that's where Alastair Sim is from. Now, this picture came out in 1954, and Jennifer was very good buddies, and we were friends with Mark Crowley, the playwright. Now, Mark Crowley wrote a play called The Boys in the Band, which is the first great gay play, in so much as all the characters are gay in it, and if you've ever seen it, there's two motion pictures of it, one that William Friedkin made in the late 60s, early 70s, and then one from a couple of years ago that Joe Montella directed, with Matt Bomer and a really sexy, Zach Quinto and all that in the cast. And it was a landmark when it came out in 1969, because there was a play that was a bunch of gay men on stage having a birthday party, getting high, dancing, drinking, and talking about what it was like to be gay, right? Which in those days included a lot of self-loathing, which makes the play not as timely as it is now, because things have moved on, thank goodness. However, it's a monumental play. And then when they put out the 50th anniversary of it, it was on Broadway, and Mark Crowley got a Tony for Best Revival of a play that had never been on Broadway before, but was revived and put on Broadway and was a big smash hit, and then they made that Netflix movie out of it. Why are you bringing this up? Because Mark Crowley, before he was a playwright, was Natalie Wood's assistant, right? Now, Mark Crowley was living in Mississippi at the time and was a gay man growing up there, and he was feared for his life because he was afraid some of his relatives were going to kill him for being gay. And Elia Kazan was down there shooting that Natalie Wood Warren Beatty picture, Splendor in the Grass. And Mark Crowley was a teenager, and he got a job being a PA on the movie. And Elia Kazan said to him, if you're ever a New York kid, look me up, and I'll give you a job. So Mart was in New York. He went to New York. He left Mississippi. And he ran into Elia Kazan, and Elia Kazan gave him a job, and then he started a lifelong relationship with Natalie Wood. So in 1961, Natalie Wood was making a picture right here in Hollywood, directed by Robert Wise, called West Side Story, where she awesomely played a Puerto Rican. Yeah, those were the days, huh? And Natalie Wood is the young Puerto Rican lead in West Side Story. And there was loads of dancers in the movie, right? And I'm going to break your bubble on this, but a lot of the dancers in that movie were gay men. And the Sharks and the Jets. I know, shock horror. And so they were having a big party one night here in Hollywood, and Mart was attending the party. And they all decided to dress up as the Bells of St. Trinian. So they put on little schoolgirl outfits and knee socks and rubbed dirt on their faces and had little wigs on and shit. And it got out of control, and their homophobic neighbors fucking called the cops. And they were all thrown in fucking LA County. And they said to Mart while they were in the cell together, Jesus Christ, we're gonna get fucking fired off this movie because we're all in drag and we're in a jail cell and we're shooting tomorrow. And Mart said, how long's the picture been going? And they were like 6 weeks. He's like, fuck that. They're way too far into this for a movie to fire you. So he fucking called Natalie Wood from the jail where they were all dressed as the Bells of St. Trinian. And Natalie Wood called her lawyer, and they were sprung and went from the jail to the set of West Side Story to shoot the Mambo scene. These are the stories that you get at the Greg Proops Film Club that you will not be getting from Leonard Maltin, although I adore Leonard Maltin. I adore Leonard Maltin. There was no knock on him. The Bells of St. Trinian is a female empowerment movie. How so? You said that the lead was a man in drag. First of all, that's female empowerment. And second of all, this is a movie about out-of-control women. The teenage girls in this movie are out of control. The teachers in this movie are out of control. There's a line when Alastair Sim walks into the teacher's lounge and there's so much fucking smoke, he goes, ah, yes, this reminds me, I can't remember what he says. This reminds me of the jail at Port Said. Thank you. And the whole premise of the movie is that these girls are completely wild. They bootleg, they smoke, they're out of control. There's a field hockey match that's fairly unforgettable in this movie at one point. And Alastair Sim's character, Miss Frizen, says, you see, in other schools, girls are sent out quite unprepared into a merciless world. But when our girls leave here, it's the merciless world which has to be prepared. And now I give you from 1954, directed by Frank Launder, starring Alastair Sim and Hermione Baddeley, The Bells of St. Trinian.